opportunities yet.
We'll judge the size of the story and the size of the hands at the end of this evening. Leon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
All right, my numbers friends. Nevada. What does that mean? What does Nevada mean?
It means nothing at this point. I mean, it really doesn't mean anything. Look,
again, Jason Johnson, this is television. I need you to hype it up.
I'm being perfectly candid with you. Like, it doesn't mean anything, and I don't mean to be nihilistic or anything else like that. But the hardcore truth that we're dealing with here is that it's about these Midwestern states. And if Hillary Clinton doesn't end up performing better in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, she can win by 50 million points in Nevada, and it's not going to end up making a difference one way or another. I'm not exactly putting a fork in it, but I'm certainly starting to shine it off.
If we took Nevada off the board, she wouldn't have had a path.
Okay.
And so Nevada was a must-win for her. She did, which is great, but we're still looking at those scenarios that we talked about on the map.
Miss Nevada?
It's not a surprise. I mean, those numbers indicated very early on that she was going to win. The registration numbers were through the roof. The turnout was through the roof. Early vote gave a significant lead to Democrats across the state. So it was looking good for the presidential race. It was looking good for the Senate race. It was looking good for the entire down ballot. I haven't checked the state legislative races, but I'm pretty sure they've taken back both houses as well. So I would not be surprised if the entire state was a complete sweep for the House, the Senate, the presidential, and the state legislative houses.
We've talked about a number of different electorates, key among them, and I know we will come back to them, the black vote, the Latino vote. We've even talked about the millennial vote. There's a vote that we've not talked about, though, and that is the women's vote. And there is an unprecedented gender gap. I'm getting this. Exit polls nationally, the gender gap was 24 points. It's the widest in exit polls back to 1976. In preliminary exit polls, Clinton was up 12 among women, and Donald Trump was up 12 among men, which I guess you can say that gender gap is as much a story about men as it is a story about women. You know, we did this special called The Woman Card and looked at the role that women would play in this election. And part of what I learned doing that was that this gender gap began to emerge in 1980 after the winds of the women's movement had actually come to fruition. You had more women living by themselves, more women earning their own income. And then that coupled with Ronald Reagan's candidacy, which was very hawkish, which talked about cuts to social welfare programs, also, exacerbated this divide. And I wonder what you guys think about why we're seeing it here. I mean, perhaps the answer is very obvious, but it's not just about Donald Trump alienating women. It's also about a message that he was sending to men, right?
Absolutely. But I mean, look, it goes both ways. I think this idea, I mean, yes, it's very obvious what happened and why. The women who didn't vote for Trump and women who did vote for Hillary Clinton. But you also are not seeing a clear 100% support from women across the board for Hillary Clinton, or men that didn't support Trump and voted for Hillary Clinton. I think this is just a much deeper issue that we have to talk about. This isn't just about sexism. This isn't just about men who didn't want to vote for Hillary or women who didn't want to vote for Hillary because she's a woman. Yes, some of that is true, and I've experienced that as a former elected official and the sexism that occurs in our political landscape. But she's also a flawed candidate, and we've talked about that over and over and over again. And, and that's why me as a woman decided to choose in the primary Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton. So it's just not a cut and dry issue.
And if there's one also silver lining, I meant to say this before about Rashad, the grassroots, regardless of who won, the grassroots was going to be in charge of making sure they did the right thing, even if it was a Clinton presidency. It is motivated. It is active. I mean, when we say down ballot and people's eyes might, glaze over these local races, that's a big deal. Translating really, really complicated things and getting people to vote down the ballot for progressive, criminal justice issues is a big deal. So in some way, even though the grassroots is going to be really, really motivated for Clinton and holding her feet to the fire, since she is not a progressive candidate, nobody is saying she was. Now that it's Trump,
Now that it's potentially Trump,
Sorry, now that it's potentially Trump, maybe there's some potentially silver lining here. It's going to be really dominant.
I don't have your optimism.
Yeah.
Look, because we're talking about this has been an issue that we've seen throughout the Obama administration. We've seen how the Republicans have blocked judges. We've seen how Republicans have blocked district attorneys. You can do all the grassroots work that you want, and it's not to dismiss or deny it. But if President Trump decides that his Department of Justice is going to crack down on activism, if President Trump decides that he's going to crack down on media organizations in whatever indirect fashions that he wants, this isn't going to be about activism. This is going to have to darn near be a revolution on the ground. And unless people are willing to die and go that far, let's be real, okay, activism is going to be crushed in a way that we haven't fathomed under this administration. He's made it very clear that that's the kind of president he'll be.
I do think that people would be willing to die for stuff like that in this country. You don't think so?
It's happened in the past.
You don't think so?
Mark,
Not this
Look
country.
at what's happening now.
People died in civil rights, and people died, in the labor movement in the early 20th century.
They did. I don't think
it's happened in the past.
So I want to push back a little on the notion that Clinton didn't run a grassroots campaign and didn't invest in grassroots, out of respect for all the work that organizers have done in this election. And I think we should give a shout out to the folks who worked really hard and who did organize. If you look at the organizations that Trump and Clinton brought into this campaign, Clinton had 5 times as many staff and 2.5 times as many local offices, which was about investing in grassroots organizations in order to identify supporters, register voters, and move folks to the polls. I think these results aren't what we expected, which is probably going to show to be more about polling and how the polling was different than what we thought it would be. But in terms of the grassroots, Clinton ran a grassroots campaign. She invested in a grassroots organization, and I just want to give a shout out to all the folks.
But does that challenge the Democratic Party's theory of elections and their theory of change, right? I mean, the thing that we kept hearing was, even if people prefer Donald Trump, don't worry, guys, we got an awesome ground game, and we're going to make sure that we turn people out. I mean, I think in as much as you had a GOP autopsy report that went back to the ideology of the party, it does seem that win or lose, the Democratic establishment is going to have to ask some questions, A, about the conversation we've been having about being progressive enough, about bringing communities of color to the table in a real and meaningful way, but also just at a very, nerdy nuts and bolts level about whether or not that operation is enough to compensate for a candidate that, may not naturally inspire people out to the polls.
If you look at the numbers of what the Clinton campaign produced and compare it to what we did in 2012, the numbers are comparable. They had 1 million volunteers who were out knocking on doors and making phone calls, which is the same number that we had in 2012. They knocked on 20 million doors and made 20 million doors and phones in the last 3 days of the election, which is the same as what we did in 2012. So I think in terms of the organization that they
the people
built,
answering the doors don't like her.
Different kinds of
Right, exactly.
Who cares how many doors you knock on?
One thing is a campaign operation on the ground. Respect and understood and agree with those people that knocked on doors and all those numbers that you're citing. Another one is grassroots, which I mean color of change. I mean immigration groups. I mean dreamers. They were going to be responsible for holding Clinton's feet to the fire, and they are going to be responsible to mobilize, come together, and hold Trump's feet to the fire. And the difference also, Hillary Clinton did not present a vision of America. She didn't lead with ideas. Rather, she said, I'm what's standing between you and the apocalypse. People vote for, not against. Except for my Republican friends that voted against Hillary Clinton and voted for Trump.
I got to be honest, and maybe this is a bit sort of macro or meta or whatever, but there is a possibility, depending on what this result is, there's a possibility that maybe Obama was the aberration. And maybe if we really look at how America functions, that Trump is more in line with how this country has operated over the last 30, 40 years than Obama. Maybe he was the outlier. We had Bush. We had right-leaning Clinton. We had Bush before him. We had Reagan before then. Obama's the outlier. This may be, unfortunately, inexorably where America was moving towards, some sort of bizarre, less than competent dictatorship. And that may be something that was going to happen. No, but I just think it's too simple.
To that point, Trump represents also sort of the ways in which media culture changes, right? If you think about Roosevelt and the radio, Reagan and the pageantry of TV, Kennedy and TV, the way that Obama mastered the internet, and the way that Trump has mastered social media and reality TV, where the villain is the star. You don't get more followers on reality TV and you don't get more followers on Twitter by handing out cookies and being nice to everyone. More people like you and they follow you in those two spaces. And for anyone who's been following Trump's career, he's a master of reality TV and a master of social media. Two places in which being the villain, being the person who stirs things up, gets you more followers. It gets you more admirers. And I think that in ways in which trends can change, we did not predict the ways in which a man named Barack Hussein Obama, black man, could be president. I mean, if you had told me 2 years before he had announced that he'd be president of the United States, I would have laughed and you know, walked away.
And I want to talk about Obama's legacy because I do think that's a big part of what's at stake tonight. But before we do that, I want to bring in my colleague Ryan Nurse, who